So here's a little fun fact for everyone. My guest today is Michael Grandi. There he is, right on the screen. And the fun fact is, you know what? This is the third time that we had to reschedule our FYI appearance to be together because Michael doesn't have what you would call a 9 to 5 kind of a job. He's got something really 24/7, I feel like. And I thought everyone might find it interesting to understand a little bit more what is it a day in the life of someone in this funeral industry. So if you want to know more about that, just stay tuned. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Scan FYI. My guest today is Michael Grandi. He is with Jersey Memorial Group. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Andrea. How are you? Nice to see you this morning.
Finally, nice to see you. Our third attempt. I guess third time's a charm.
That's right. I think we've been at it for almost 4 weeks now since the
Back and
first time we
forth,
were
back and forth.
scheduled to appear.
That's right. So there's a reason for this because, like I said, Mike doesn't have your standard 9 to 5 job, 5 days a week. It's really I think it's kind of a unique situation what you do for a living. And so, first of all, if you would, Mike, just tell everyone a little bit about you. What is Jersey Memorial Group and what is your role there? And then we'll get into our conversation.
Sure. Jersey Memorial Group is a company that operates a network of funeral homes in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, 15 in total. We're family owned and operated. I've been a funeral director now going on 26 years. So, by trade, I'm a funeral director, trained to deal with families, decedents, things of that sort. So now I have a dual role because I work in, more of a management level as VP of operations. But again, we're licensed funeral directors first. So there's many
There's
times
that
we come
thought.
out of the
Yep.
office and we're with the families. This past Saturday, I took a funeral for a family to a cemetery because we had multiple funerals. So yeah, we get right back into it when we need to.
You're in an industry that goes on 24/7. For a lot of people, we go to work, we come home, and maybe we have the weekends off, or the point is, maybe we have a very set schedule. But people pass away not on your schedule. It happens when it happens. And I
Yeah.
think it's kind of a something that people don't think about. They just maybe see, well, he's the funeral director, here he is. But maybe 20 minutes ago, maybe you just took a taxi in from an airport because you were somewhere else. So what is your day like? What is this job like for people who don't know?
So typically for me in general in my role, as operations, I have my management teams and my staff, and we communicate, daily, and that's 7 days a week. I'm always connected in some way, whether directly or indirectly. And I'm on site. I move between buildings. Sometimes it's meetings, things like that. But typically with our organization in particular, at the end of every day, each of my regions have group text messages with all the staff from admins to funeral directors to our managers. And we basically, at the end of each day, we recap what transpired during the day. And then we put together our plan for the next day, who's in what building, what funerals need to be tended to, how they're staffed. If there's families coming in for arrangements, it could be families coming to pick up items like death certificates or cremated remains. I mean, there's a multitude of things that happen daily in our building based upon,
Mhm.
our business. And, at 5 o'clock, sometimes 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, we could put a solid plan in place where everybody needs to be. Well, that's all well and good, but from
It's a
5 o'clock,
plan.
from yeah, from 5 o'clock p.m. to 8 o'clock a.m. overnight, we're experiencing death. We're getting calls from nursing homes or hospitals or houses. People are still passing away. Um, so, and with the amount of organizations we have, it's not unusual because of the volume of families we're serving in
Right,
the community. So, like with us, I plan a scan FYI weeks out. It looks great. It goes on my calendar, but typically my schedule is most volatile within 24 to 72 hours because I don't know if I'm needed on a funeral because we have multiple that day and there's only so many licensed funeral directors and families
right.
that, can see. And now I have to plug myself in. Or sometimes, everybody's out of the office on funerals, but a family has the need to come in at a particular time based on their logistics. So we have to be very flexible, even though we do have our plans in place. So typically, what happens is in the morning, we have same thing. The person that was on call, the director that was on call that night to take any active deaths that happen, will report to the group in the morning everything that transpired overnight. And then what I'll do with the key managers is we'll sidebar and talk outside of that so that we can figure out, okay, how does this change our day, or is
Yeah.
our day staying, according to plan? Because now we may have to go and pick up a decedent at a hospital. A family may be coming in, things that are going to change the outlook or the dynamic of how we had the day planned.
So
Mm.
I want to let everyone know that Scan FYI is actually planned months in advance, months.
Mhm.
It's rare that something happens in just a week, but it's planned out months. And so, I mean, not only you, but for anyone, part of the workforce, things change
Mhm.
on a dime.
Yeah.
But I can certainly understand that, you've put in a plan. Of course, I'm sure you write everything in pencil. You put in a plan for tomorrow, but then overnight in the world that you're part of, so many things can be happening
Correct.
that can totally disrupt your day and everyone in your organization's day. So you are it cannot be an easy thing for you. You wake up and what's my day like today? Really, it must change all the time.
It changes all the time. And, you have to remember, I mean, we're dealing with consumers and they've had a loss and they have lives as well. So, there's times where, again, somebody has a loss at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And our directors on call are finding out that, they have to get the kids on the bus in the morning and they only have an hour and a half window to get into the funeral home, maybe because a work obligation or something else going on that they have to tend to. So we're very, very sensitive about the family's needs before our own. Again, if you ever lost a loved one, the last thing you want to hear from a funeral director is, well, I can't see you right now because I have to record a scan FYI, not to
Yeah.
diminish what we do. It's
No,
very
no,
important,
you're
but,
of course.
um,
In the
you
scheme of
know,
things, this is not
correct.
the most important thing in your life. Of
Yep.
course.
So, there's, and again, there's going to be circumstances where we absolutely can't. If I'm out on a funeral, I mean, I'm only one licensed funeral director. It's like, a surgeon that does surgery and you telling him that you have to have two operating rooms going at the same time. Well, he can only be in one place at one time unless you have two surgeons. If I'm out on a funeral and I'm not going to be back until 12 o'clock and I don't have another staff member that's licensed that could sit down with a family, then yes, there's certain extenuating circumstances. But for the most part, our motto is always families first, and we always try to find out what their needs are and then align it with ours. And most people are, well, tell me what time you need me to come in. I'm very, very
Yeah.
flexible. And then we could basically just tell them the time and they could come in. The other thing that we encounter in the sense of urgency is a lot of times when somebody's at their end of life, there's loved ones that are in town for that event that's about to happen that don't normally live here. So the
Yeah.
family will say, listen, my brother's in from North Carolina. He's been here 4 days. He had to take off of work. if we could get these arrangements taken care of pretty quickly, because he really just has to get his life back, because he's going to be flying back up again, now for funeral services. So there's that whole family dynamic that, comes into play as well, depending on the circumstances and, each family.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself that this is not a job for someone who is very controlling and rigid about, their life and their schedule, because that's just not going to work. You're in a very, really a volatile industry. Things are happening all the time. So you personally, everyone has to be very flexible and ready to, bend to the whims of all these demands.
I'm going to tell you
That
something
can't be
interesting
easy.
that I'm going to tell you something very interesting that most people are always shocked at. We still, till this day, we get a large amount of walk-ins. People that just they
Like,
get a phone call that their loved one died, and they get in the car and drive over to the funeral home, and they walk in unannounced and say, "Hey, my mom passed away and I'm here to make arrangements." We get a tremendous amount of walk-in unannounced business with people that have deaths.
all right, that I didn't see that coming.
Yep. So you talk to most funeral directors, they'll tell you the same thing. It's not as prevalent as it used to be. People, plan a little bit more, but we do. We just get somebody walks in and it's, how can I help you? Yeah, I just lost my mom a couple hours ago, and I need help. And luckily, you need a licensed funeral director to always meet with families, and we're not always on site. But luckily, with the depth in our organization, our administrative team are always prepared to keep the family comfortable, have them have a seat. They could gather preliminary information. That's
Hmm.
information we use for a death certificate, things of that sorts. They're not talking about services, they're not offering merchandise. And then, usually within 30 minutes, even if I have to bring somebody in from another location, I can have a licensed funeral director on site, sitting with them at that time.
Well, first of all, I'm still like walk-ins. Okay,
Walk-in, yep, we
didn't,
call them walk-in,
mhm.
walk-in death calls. Normally
Wow.
we get them over the phone, but many people walk in and just announce. I mean, there's been many times I'm locking up a building at 5 o'clock to go home for the day, and somebody's walking up the front steps and they're like, mom just passed away, and can we sit down and talk to somebody? And I'm turning the lights back on, and now I'm there until 7 o'clock at night sitting down with the family. So there's been many times over my career I've had to call people I was meeting for dinner or somebody and say, "Hey, listen, I know I'm supposed to be there in 20 minutes, but I got a family that just walked in. I'm not going to see you for a couple of hours." That's a reality for most funeral directors, um, daily.
So you have to be a very unselfish person because your needs are always put aside for somebody, even someone who would walk in.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, in many other industries, a walk-in you would say come back tomorrow. But this is such a different situation. I feel like these are things that people would never even know about or think about.
Yeah.
But
I'll
this is
tell you
this
an
is the
interesting, an
reality.
interesting, an interesting story from years ago. It's got to be about probably 15 years ago. And I was still young in my career, and it was Thanksgiving Day, and a family had had a loss on Thanksgiving Eve. And it's very unusual that a family wants to come in on Christmas Day, Thanksgiving Day. They'll usually push it off because that's still important time for them to be together with their family, even though there's been a loss, they're mourning. And I had a family that wanted to come in and make arrangements on Thanksgiving Day. I end up talking to a friend of mine at that time, and he called to wish me a happy Thanksgiving. And I said, "Yeah, I'm at the office today working." And he's like, "Oh man," he's like, "You're working on Thanksgiving Day?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a funeral director. Death doesn't take a holiday. I mean, people
Yeah.
have needs even on a holiday." And I remember thinking to myself, and I told him, I said, I said, but it's not really a bad day for me because at some point I'm going to go home hours later and I'm going to be sitting down with my family enjoying what's left of my Thanksgiving. And these people are sitting with me today because they're minus one family member that they're never going to be able to have Thanksgiving with again. So my day working on Thanksgiving is really not a bad day compared to somebody else's, you
You're
know?
right. You're right.
And when you have that perspective and you think of others, my job is not bad, that I have to work on a holiday or maybe I'm away from my family. I have that to still go and look forward to. Somebody else is having more of a horrible day than I am. And just because I had to go to work, again, it's not the end of the world. We have to make a living. So, yep.
Not a job for everybody, that's for sure. Like
No,
what are the things like that you could recognize in yourself that you knew that you would be all right, my light just went out. See? Live performance.
there you go.
What are some things that you recognized about yourself that you understood that you would be okay with this, that this kind of a job, it's really 24/7. It's
Mhm.
not a set schedule.
I knew I would be fine in funeral service because my path before this was law enforcement, and that was my dream to be a cop. I got my criminal justice degree first. That was my pursuit. And the reason why I sought law enforcement, obviously, the nature of the work helping people, but most importantly, I cannot be a 9 to 5. I can't sit in an
Okay,
office.
interesting. Yeah.
I was attracted to law enforcement because, again, every day you get in your patrol car if you're a patrolman, and you basically are flying with the wind. I mean, whatever calls come in, you never know what your day is going to entail, what emergencies you're going to have. I mean, every day is different for somebody in law enforcement than maybe if you work in the insurance industry or you just work in an office all day, or somebody in a bank just goes to a bank and they're a teller or they're a loan officer and they have meetings with people, not taking, anything away from anybody's job,
We
but
need those people
um,
too. We need those
I,
nine to
yeah,
fivers.
I
Yeah.
like and I'm attracted more to the volatility of my day. So when I was seeking law enforcement, I was looking for something that was going to make my days unpredictable and unique. And it offered that. So when I decided that, funeral service was going to be a path, it was something very similar. Some days my days are planned. Some days I'm in the office all day because we still have to run an operation and a business. But
Mhm.
some days, again, the phone rings midday and it completely puts my day on a different trajectory, which just keeps it exciting for me. It keeps it enjoyable for me, loving, what I do and that aspect of it.
Well, that's a good thing. That is a good thing because I think I understand that the idea of not liking the typical 9 to 5, which I'm not sure if anyone has a 9 to 5 job anymore these days, but
No.
you are really a 24/7 kind of a job, and yeah, wow, listen, I'm still thinking about the walk-in.
Yeah, our phones are answered 365 days a year, 24 hours a
Yeah,
day.
it would have to be.
I mean, we have our buildings typically closed, for Christmas Day, New Year's Day, Thanksgiving Day, and 4th of July. Those are like the holidays that we, you know, honor per se. But even though we don't have people reporting to those buildings that day to be there, we still have people that are, available to be engaged. And most times they are. As things are happening, they're taking phone calls. If somebody passes away and there is preparation of those human remains that need to be done, or like an embalming, that's going to be done that day. It's not something that we're going to wait for. Or people pass away in nursing homes and houses, they need to be picked up within several hours of that happening. So we have staff that are waiting, to be engaged for those kinds of things. So ultimately we're open 365 days a year. Our business is functioning and operating.
So we're kind of pulling back the cover here and giving people a glimpse into through Michael Grandi what it's like to be a funeral director. And I think most people would find that it's not at all what you think. Not at all. What for you is just, if we could say, the best part, or the part that gives you the most satisfaction of that you took this career path?
For me, it's making a terrible time for somebody in their life a little bit easier, taking some of the burden off of them, um, being able to honor and celebrate life and help them have that shift in thought. Because naturally, when you lose somebody, it's no matter what age they are, it's a loss, you're mourning. But we try to, shift that and help the family create a meaningful tribute to their loved one, through whatever services they're going to choose. So probably the greatest thing for me is, when a family simply comes up to you after a service is done and they said, I really want to, thank you for all that you did. We don't know how we would have gotten through this. Or, we get the hug from that family and they carry that with them. When you've done a good job, and when you've made a difference, in somebody's life. And, again, I hope everybody that I serve is 95 and 100 years old. But, we serve newborn children, we have stillbirths, we have
Yeah.
children that die of diseases, we have accidents, we have homicides, we have suicides. We're dealing with the other side of it. And then you're dealing with the family dynamic and walking into a room, we never know. When I sit down with a mom that just tells me that she lost her 20-year-old son, to substance abuse, we don't know that story. We sit down with this mom or dad or their siblings, and most of the time it's my job to just ask a lot of questions so that I can get a glimpse into what this family went through and experienced, because I have no idea the journey that they've been on to
Right.
end up at my table. And when you do that and you understand, that's when you can be empathetic towards their situation. You can understand the struggles that they may have went through, all the things that they tried to do. And then I can kick into gear and I know what my job and role has to be, at that point, when you're dealing with situations like that.
Because even though the common denominator is that people are in front of you, but everyone has a story. Everyone has a unique story of their arrival.
Mhm.
I'm sure no two are ever the same, and so you must you must meet so many interesting people that have so much to share.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've there's a thing I heard. We didn't coin the phrase, but years ago there was, when people were pre-planning, it said, every life has a story. How will yours be told? And that just stuck out with me because it's the absolute truth. I mean, I could serve 150 families in a year, 150 decedents, individuals that passed away. And you're absolutely right. There's not going to be two remotely identical decedents. There's not going to be identical families. And most importantly, the family dynamics vary and their personal preferences and their thoughts vary. So you have to, you know, go into it with an open mind. They call us funeral directors, right? And the first thing I tell families, I'm not the director. Okay. I'm the facilitator.
You're the right.
You're the director, because it's my job to compile information, find out what direction you need me to go in to get all this planned, how you want things to be, and then I'm going to facilitate it. Now, I'll make some suggestions, I'll give you guidance, I'll give you pros and cons. But at the end of the day, you're the one giving me direction on how this is going to happen.
You know, that's an interesting thing to say it like that, because I do feel like for a lot of people in their time of grief, when they're in front of you and they're probably looking to someone else, maybe they'd like someone else to make all the call all the shots, make all the decisions, but it's you're not the director. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And ultimately, I guess you know, you're even celebrating someone's life. You're telling a story. Interesting way to look at
Yeah,
it. I like that. Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, you definitely picked. I think of it as a unique profession. I think it's not for everyone, and I do admire your empathy and your flexibility. I've seen it all firsthand, and I also want to remind everyone that all Michael's contact info is in the show notes and on the screen. Should you want to get in touch with him, because let's just touch on something very quickly, and that is just kind of pre-planning, letting people know in advance what you might want to do so that your family is not in a, you know, complete tizzy at the end, right? Talk about that for just a moment.
Absolutely. I mean, we do a lot of stuff that I've done with Scan, and a lot of the community outreach is on pre-planning. And we always tell families, pre-planning doesn't have to look a certain way. It could just be discussing the options that you want or going over what those are. It can be discussing what happens at the time of death, what's involved. Most importantly, we like people to document it. Sit down with us, document it. All the information, the questions that we ask, select merchandise. You can pay for services now and take the financial burden off of your family, because most of the time when somebody experiences a loss, again, life is still happening. It
Yeah.
doesn't stop. The phone's ringing, the kids have school, you still have an office and all these other things. And now you have this added burden, of I have to sit down with the funeral director, I have to plan this service, I have to rearrange my schedule. Sometimes you have to get on a plane and book flights and all these things. And we ask a lot of questions that the average person, unless they've really discussed what they wanted, don't know how to answer most times, especially when it comes to religious ceremonies. Are there, certain readings or scriptures, things that you would want, hymns that you would want to be sung or reflected on? Graveside services. Do you want families speaking and eulogizing? Do you just want it to be all religious ceremony? So there's a lot involved with planning and executing a service effectively for a family. And a lot of times we look at children of deceased and they look at each other and go, do you know what mom wanted? Do you know
No,
what dad wanted?
don't.
Are you comfortable with this budget? It's a money thing too. Think about it. I mean, everybody that has a loss knows that there's going to be a financial expense incurred. We don't know what or how much, but services are going to have to be paid for. Now, does the person at the table have the liquid or enough on their credit card to do that? Is there going to be enough assets inherited? Is there life insurance? Then there's this financial aspect, involved as well, that comes in. So we try to negate all that with getting people to the table to sit down, go through this with a funeral director so that everybody is better prepared. We hope we don't get a phone call for 20 years and that file sits in our cabinet.
Right.
But when it does happen, it's going to make the world of difference. It really is.
It does. And I'll speak from personal experience. I went ahead and did that because I didn't want any burdens on my family. And I just think that I know, you know, we don't like to talk about it. Of course not. We want to think we're just going to go on, but it is something that is inevitable for all of us. And it just makes the process, not for you, but for everyone else you're
Correct.
leaving
Yeah.
behind.
Absolutely. It's definitely. I was just looking down, believe it or not, while you were speaking to me. I The message came through about a family that's looking to, pre-plan, and that'll be a phone call I'll be making. And again, these calls come in constantly. It's something that we encourage. There's no obligation. There's no fees associated with it. That's the biggest thing. I mean, if you're prepaying, you're just putting money away. But even if you don't want to fund it, you can spend 3, 4 hours with a funeral director reviewing your options and discussing it and taking it home and discussing it with other family members and getting everything in order without ever spending a penny, and
I
that's what's
really,
important.
I believe also that most people, if you're like me, you don't even know what all your options would be.
Correct.
So look, it's worth a phone call, and
Hmm.
I
Yep.
think anyone who does some pre-planning, you will not regret this decision. It's a good decision for you, and it's good for your family. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad we finally got together. It was worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll thank you for your flexibility and your understanding. Sometimes it's a half hour to 45 minutes before we're supposed to go on, and you're always, gracious, and we get dates back on there. So, I thank you for that as well.
My pleasure. All right, remember out there, if it's important to you, it's important to us. I'm Andrea Tarr. We'll see you next time on Scan FYI. Bye, everyone, and bye, Mike.
Bye bye.